this talk about this being a racialized conflict with white supremacism trying to wage war against brown bodies, if you put the average Israeli next to the average Palestinian, they are often quite impossible to tell apart.
It's not an apartheid state institutionally with South Africa.
Yes.
An apartheid state it was also, you could argue, was Second World War Germany, where if you were Jewish, you were, because of your supposed racial difference, you were subject to different
absolutely.
a different law.
In Israel,
in Israel is not the case.
We had cases where Arab Muslim judges of the Supreme Court were sentencing Israeli prime ministers to jail for corruption. This is naturally something that is would have been impossible in Germany or in South Africa.
There have been some recent changes, but if you know, this whole idea, as the world has advanced, and as, for example, racism is much less of an issue than it used to be, obviously. There were signs in the 50s, you could go around London or anywhere else, big cities, and you wanted to rent a flat, and it would say, no Irish, no Jews. And you don't see that sort of thing anymore, thank God. But as we have become more and more tolerant, and as folk find that their racial background is less and less of a disadvantage, if a disadvantage at all, yet the left and the trouble causers assume that we are living in the age of maximum racism.
Yes,
which is bizarre.
It's also interesting to see how the word racism has increased in media use. If you do a graph from the 80s and 90s, you can see that there was a rise in the 90s and 2000s, but there was an explosion somewhere around 2018, 19, 20. Actually 20 with the George Floyd incident and the Black Lives Matter protests, then it became global, you could say. And it's starting to take root in societies which did not really have this divide previously. For example, in large parts of Latin America, the Spanish were so few from early on, and they were so open to mixing with the local population that you had these huge mestizo populations that sprung up, and there really was no form of some form of these camps being set up that were warring against each other. And now in Brazil, for example, it's becoming an increasing problem. But returning to Israel itself, as you mentioned with the protests, for example, they talk about that there is a genocide taking place in Gaza over the last couple of years. The population in Gaza has nearly doubled in a decade or so. But at the same time, if we look at, for example, what has happened to Christian or Jewish populations in the Middle East over the last 40, 50, 60 years, we could take the case of Yemen as an example. Yemen was one of the first places in the world that had a large Jewish population. There was even a Jewish kingdom there at one point. The first Jews settled there 2,600 years ago, and at least in the first few centuries after Islam appeared, they lived in quite peaceful, on peaceful terms with the Muslim population there. Around the 13th century, when a new Shia dynasty came in from what is more or less today's Iran and started taking over, their situation started deteriorating, and from then on it went in waves. Sometimes it was a little bit better, sometimes it was worse, and by worse I mean mass killings, forced conversions, and so on. But it was really in the late 19th century, early 20th century that things became really bad, and by 1881 the first Yemeni Jews started moving to the Holy Land, which at that time was, today is Israel, but at that time it was part of the Ottoman Empire. So also this claim that all the Jews arrived to Israel in 1945 are false. This is a process that started already in the 19th century, and many of these Jews were not Ashkenazi Jews from Europe, but rather these Mizrahi or Eastern Jews, or if they are from North Africa, then Sephardic, if from Middle East, then Mizrahi. even after the First World War, you had around 70,000 Yemeni Jews. That number kept on getting smaller and smaller. In 1949, 1950, you have quite a large drive of these Yemeni Jews moving to Israel. But still you have thousands of them left in the country. It is in the 1990s, the early 2000s, that we are getting down to a couple of hundred. By the 2010s, we're down to a couple of dozen. Today there is one Yemeni Jew left in Yemen, and he is imprisoned by the Houthi rebels, and they have exposed him to torture for a couple of years, which has left him with partial paralyzation. So a community which 2 generations ago numbered in, well, nearly 100,000 is today down to 1 person.
Adam, as usual, the clock in the corner of the room, notwithstanding this exciting discussion, is blinking at me, so we must call a pause there, but fear not, we'll pick it up next time. Alas, yet again, time has caught up with us, but don't worry, we'll continue the story next time on Poland Daily History, when we hope you'll join us. In the meantime, thank you for watching.